Grief and grieving are topics that we don't talk about very often. Um, of late, what we've been going through here in India due to the pandemic has really filled a lot of our hearts with grief. Um, and I, for one, don't know what to do with this grief. Um, Knowing friends who were there till yesterday but are no longer with us today, and um, it feels very tough to make sense of this sudden transition. I think this is a time when, um, as human beings, as a species who's aware of their own mortality, I don't know if other species are. The fact just hits home harder than ever, and um, one just wonders that knowing that death is inevitable when it happens in such large numbers in an unexpected way where we don't get a chance to say goodbye um, to those who matter. How does one handle the grief? And since I didn't have the answer, I thought I'd invite someone who's done a lot of work in trauma and grief, Dr. David Drake, who's the CEO and founder of the Moment Institute. And David generously agreed to share some of his insights. And um, so I felt like sharing this conversation with you all.
Grief comes in many, many flavors, oftentimes in the same day or the same hour, even. And so part of it, again, is being able to, in some ways, normalize grief, that it has all these different aspects to it, to be able to let ourselves experience them, figure out, notice when they're what phase we might be in, or kind of what sensation we're having around grief. But again, I was talking to a friend yesterday about, I realized that one of my patterns in all of my work has been to help clients turn nouns into verbs, because nouns, they can't do much with nouns. We like to label things and put them in boxes, and A, it's not reflective of reality, which is very dynamic, and B, I just find often it can be disempowering. And so to say, I'm grieving, again, to be in India at the moment and not grieve would mean you were not paying attention. Yeah, and so part of it is then, and my understanding of your culture is you have a lot of great rituals around grief.
Yeah.
Some of which you can't do right now because it's this dangerous in terms of exposure. And I was thinking about this the other day when I was watching the news about how that one of the issues of trying to get the pandemic under control there is because you have so many extraordinary public rituals.
Yes.
That's one of the greatest sources of pride in your culture, which is, I mean, it's beautiful to watch them. And I've seen shows and things, and right now it's difficult, and some people then are, but having this tension between carrying on that tradition and being safe. So I just thought, certainly maybe it's from young people, I don't know, coming up with sort of like temporary rituals that carry the spirit forward of what people are used to, but kept them safer.
Yeah.
Um, like virtual rituals, in-house rituals, just approximations. They won't be the same because they don't have that community spirit or that community kind of presence, but allows you. And so you see this a lot on. We saw this in some of the televised events or sporting events in the States, where they actually use technology to create a crowd, but it was just a crowd of screens. And it wasn't the same, but it sort of, everybody clapped, everything was real time. And so you could have that feeling of having others around you while at the same time being really safe. And so, again, part of it's, harnessing our own innate creativity and our own sort of commitment to make the best of things, to say, rather than risk things because that's what we've always done, can we step out of that into this rare moment in time and create some new options for ourselves just for now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Um, in fact, as you know, as you were speaking, I could think of, one dear friend of mine who's working on that, and um, all of last year, he and his team supported us as a family do certain rituals online. There's someone was
Mm-hmm.
guiding us, and we were trying to do it at home.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's amazing that you bring that up. If you were to understand, a bit more about grief, David, and grieving.
Yeah.
Uh, what does it? So it's a natural process, but would love some insights into how it helps us grow, and if we were
Yeah.
to restory loss and grief, how would
Yeah.
we restory it, or you know maybe
Mm.
change the narrative a bit and embrace it just like fear, that it is
Yeah.
natural and it's a part of our journey.
Yeah. It's, for me, the people that do best with grief are the ones that recognize where they might feel still attached. And a lot of the, uh, it's always a fascinating thing about us as humans that we always act so surprised when somebody dies, as if that's never happened. you know it is the nature of life, and again, you have in your culture some pretty amazing rituals around this, but um for me, just recognizing that, like I said, grief has many flavors, comes in many forms. And I remember when I was experiencing the very first big loss in my life, one of the promises I made to myself was that as long as it didn't hurt me in any way, I would just pay attention to what I needed each day and do that. And so some days when the grief was too much, I would just rest a lot. Other days when I wanted to remember the person, or to kind of sort of be in that space, I might spend time looking at old photographs or create a little altar in my house. And it just, over time, as you start to pay attention to the signals of what grief is asking of you and attending to that, and over time it starts to soften. It's not quite so harsh. And you start to, I guess, if I were to tie some of these threads together, it's about being aware of what's true for you, being aware that it's likely a normal experience of something like grief, recognizing you have more resources for it than you realize, and beginning to deploy those resources to allow yourself to be in what the moment asks of you. Um, and for me, in many ways, we grieve what we love. So it's a sign that we've loved, and a place, an object, a person, an identity, our own health. And so it's just making space for the love that we feel and felt, and then doing things that allow, over time, the grief sort of, it's sort of like, I don't know if you have, it's like a comfy pillow, in the end. It's sort of there and you can like lean into it or whatever every now and then, but it's less and less dominant in your life. Um, and it sort of, um, yeah. And then, and for me, one of the greatest gifts of grief is it invites you to stop and look at your own life. Um, and to realize that much of life is a mystery and unknown and eternal. And my closest friend we found out a few years ago that my closest friend when I was from growing up had died. And we had kind of drifted apart for various reasons of distance and whatnot, but we couldn't find out how he died. And so then I went through this whole phase of like, I need to know how he died. Then I thought, well, how's that? Why do I need that? Like, how's that going to help? It's not going to bring him back. It's not going to change anything. And somehow it feels like, somehow if I knew that, it wouldn't be so hard. And I thought, no, it is hard, because it helps me, think about how long ago that was that we knew each other and how time has passed. And, even what seemed like, as I last saw him, a very healthy person suddenly is gone. And then looks at my own health and my own life. And so again, to go back to uh, grieving versus grief. We feel grief, but we're really actually in the process of grieving. It's an activity that we're doing. And
Yes.
and then so again, it goes back to the more we can pay attention to ourselves, the more we honor our own needs, the more we'll be able to appreciate what is my grieving need for me today. Or yeah.
Yes. I think what you just said about grief allowing us to see love is so true, because I think I experienced that while, watching the news, and really
Mm,
didn't know the people who I was seeing on the screen in pain, distress, breathless. And somewhere I started experiencing breathlessness.
yeah.
And that, made me aware that maybe I don't think about it every day, but I really do love my country a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know who this person is, but we are connected.
Mm-hmm.
We are so connected that I can feel it.
Mm-hmm.
And about the power of shifting from noun to verb, because for around 3 days I was in this space where I was just thinking about, okay, so what do I, how can I channel this constructively,
Yeah.
till about yesterday when I was thinking how to help someone through the pain. And I thought, okay, probably I need to look for tools. And I, put out the
Yeah.
post that you saw.
Yeah.
And in some way, that this is the conversation that we're having is a product of grief, but a constructive product of the act of grieving,
Yeah.
the connection, and the fact that, when you saw the post, you felt connected because you believe in,
Yeah.
our shared humanity.
Yeah.
um, and you could relate to what you witnessed few months ago in, you know
Mm-hmm.
in the United States.
Yeah.
Given that, at a very young age, your work asked, what it asked of you was to be in touch with, with grief.
Mm-hmm.
uh, that must have been a very tender age for you to witness um, grief, you know or see other people experiencing grief. And how was that like?
Yeah. Well, it actually came from the exact opposite of that, in that I watched, like a lot of our parents of those generations, you didn't really talk about those things. You sort of suffered in silence, and so I recognized, even though I actually did the eulogy for my father's father, my grandfather, um, but I did the service for him. But my parents never talked about the loss of their own parents. They never seemed to have any emotional response. They never said they missed them. They never said, "Oh, I feel sad," or and they never talked about it. And so I remember looking as a kid, I said, that doesn't seem to be working for them. And then as course of kids, that we learn nothing because our parents didn't show us kind of how to grieve or how to do that. And I always had this sort of sensitivity towards um, things like grief. And I just had a sort of a spiritual roots pretty early in my life. I saw things, I felt things. And so kind of went on into some, my first couple of degrees were in that space. But then I realized that that box was pretty small. I didn't need a box like church or whatever to do what I wanted to do. But I was a hospital chaplain for a while, and I helped. I was teaching gifted kids in a middle school, and one of the kids killed himself, and so I worked with the school counselor, and we didn't actually have a program. I just said, this room's free, and I'll be there if you want to come talk. And then all these kids came, and they sat on top of desks, and they're really hungering for those really honest, authentic conversations. And I realized growing up that, like so many of my generation, we didn't have enough of that. And so I remember when I was quite young, making a promise that whatever I ended up doing with my life and my career, that I wanted to help people have those conversations. And and so for me, I just feel like we're entering into a time in human history where we need to have a lot of really big conversations about the future of the planet, the future of our species, the future of what does it mean to be a country, to be a culture, to be a man or a woman, and so I feel like I'm the pandemic has also brought out some of the not so good parts of ourselves, but it's also created I think an opening to do that more often.
The conversation with David brought about a number of insights to me, and still processing some, but here are the three key ones that I would love to share with you. I think the shift from noun to verb and from grief to grieving was really significant for me. It really reminded me of the rituals that I've seen as a child, and really how they are very subtly designed to change nouns into verbs. And now I have a newfound appreciation of these rituals that I've been part of earlier in my life. But now, after the conversation with David, there is a new dimension um, that's that these rituals have acquired um, for me. The second is that acceptance is a stage of grief, and maybe it comes a bit later in the process, but the fact that it's a part, and maybe the most important part of the journey of grieving, and that um, while on this journey, honoring our needs as we grieve and asking ourselves, what do I need today to honor myself as I grieve? That question really resonated with me. And the third insight or takeaway is the importance of having conversations about grief and grieving. And I'm glad that I took the first step by inviting David for this conversation. I would love to invite you to leave your comments and thoughts about what you feel helps you engage with grief, what helps you accept grief, and what are some of the insights that came to you while you heard David speak? Thank you.